And welcome to Appeal Yourself Off the Mat Monday edition of Bury Your Bookie. I'm Jeff DeForest, the handsome guy over there. That's Mike Jones, and Mike is chomping at the bit here. I always love it. As I come in, I do a show earlier in the morning on another platform and kind of roll out all of my material there. And then I get on with Mike here just before we get started. And you already have bizarre theories about how Vegas, once again, is just taking another serious bite out of the bankroll of the bettors when it comes to betting golf. Scotty Scheffler ends up winning the championship. That was no surprise. He was, I think, plus 450, a second choice in there behind McIlroy. It was a horse for the course. He had won 4 times at Quail Hollow. Had won this major championship in the past as well. And Scheffler, look, he'd been playing well, rounding into form all season long. It was only a matter of time before it came through, and he started busting through by winning majors now. That's his third one. But early on, I mean, they had people buzzing because you talk about the Bob Dylan movie, A Complete Unknown. That's what it looked like atop the leaderboard for a long period of time. Yet you are saying, Mike Jones, that the strange odds that were being presented for Scheffler, even when he was behind 24 other golfers, is maybe an indication. I mean, how much smarter are these bookies than we are? I mean, what kind of wall of negativity are we up against when we're wagering on these events?
Well, I guess if you're going to go off what they've taken at the beginning, that would kind of make them think they don't want the vulnerability of the big loss. So let's say there's thousands of dollars bet on Scotty Scheffler at 450, 470, the line drops. They're vulnerable at that point. And then they see him come in at 24th, 5 shots off the lead, and now they're dropping him to 325. And I'm like, that's interesting. Okay, so now you're not even getting a spot there.
Buried.
McIlroy, 4 shots behind him, was one there, and he's 22-1. So it's like, okay, this is what happened. They won. So now you go look, and then you see Vegas get off to the start. He gets it to 10, and Scheffler hasn't teed off yet. You look back at the line. Oh, now I can get Scheffler at 455-1, and you're getting him at 3-1. He's actually dropping. So to me, I thought that was really the fascinating part of looking at the lines. No betting, just looking at it, saying, this guy's 3-1 to beat the field, and he's 8 shots back in 20-something plays. I just thought it was interesting. But I guess you got to look at, like you said, there weren't any big-name guys, weren't any real major winners. You know, Rahm makes a late run at him on Sunday to go it. But, you know, I have my theory on these live guys that once you get paid a big number, are you really that motivated to go out there and do what it takes to go and play? It's going to take a mindset of a player. And I look at my guy, Brooks Koepka, who I follow and have a relationship with his dad, I know. And I just looked at him like how he got out there, and he's got other priorities and family and this. But he's got his numbers, made a lot of money, and he goes, plays a live, and has fun doing it. But is he ready to go back and compete on that daily, weekly grind of the PGA Tour that these players get under? And Brooks struggled to make the cut, and you know, and I looked around, and you got to look at that moving forward about the live guys now have gotten a couple of years under their belt with the money, and now how do they compete in these events now? So it's going to be very interesting to see what happens at the Open and the U.S. Open coming up here in the next couple of months.
Dustin Johnson's fallen off a cliff. Koepka, as you said, doesn't seem to be the same determined guy that he was. Ever since that incident, not to be disparaging, because I know you have a relationship with his father, but I've never seen a guy look more coked out than he did at that Panther game. After he had won the Masters, and you're saying to yourself, well, I don't know how dedicated this guy is to the game, and he kind of hasn't been the same since. DeChambeau's been competitive in both the Masters and the PGA, but hasn't been able to get to the wire in front. So, you know, I mean, look, they said this about Sergei Bobrovsky, one of my friends that's in the Panthers organization, who advanced by beating Toronto in a Game 7 last night to move into the Eastern Conference Finals of the Stanley Cup, that the weight of the capital in his pockets was causing a little bit of an imbalance of his ability to square up and make those critical saves. So it can happen, and the money was staggering. The weird thing is, you would think, because of the money that was being offered by the Saudis in the beginning of the Live Tour and the formation of the Live Tour, that they were plucking the very best players. Now we know Phil was at the end of his career and really hasn't done anything to distinguish himself. He's been competitive for a couple of rounds here and there, and once in a while puts in a good showing when he's competing against the PGA guys. But the fact is that when they get together now, it does seem like You're much more mentally sharp and much more tested and tournament tested if you're coming off the PGA circuit than you are
Yeah.
on the Live Tour circuit. So
Yep.
that's something to consider going in. I helped everybody by giving out Brooks Koepka, Rose, and Shane Lowry as my 3 picks, and none of them made the cut. So if you're one of those people that watches shows like this and says that guy's a complete fucking buffoon, then you profited greatly by following my advice and putting a line through it and going the other way. All right, we did have the conclusion of the basketball series between OKC and Denver. You were also remarking about the curiosity aspect of the fact that the line seemed relatively low and was staying that way in spite of the suspect status of one Aaron Gordon, who did play, but he didn't contribute much. Nobody was that much of a factor. Pedestrian game by Jokic's standards. They sat him for most of the fourth quarter, but he goes for 29 and 7, something like that. Usually has totals that are double that. Oddly, Denver had 3 games where they got blown out by 30-plus points. I think the first team in playoff history to have that happen to them, and they still took it 7 games. So a formidable opponent. Where does that leave you with regards to OKC and Minnesota coming up?
Well, I think it's an interesting series. I like the matchups for OKC a little bit. I think the work that they had to put in with switching off yesterday, I found very fascinating toward the end of the first half. 42-41, Denver down 1, 3 minutes to go. You think we got a game. And then the 2 entry passes at the top of the key. Why, I don't know. When he's got Caruso and Williams on him, 2 guys that aren't Hartenstein and Holmgren, and he doesn't want to take them in the box, in the penalty, no less. So if they grab him and foul him, he's going to the line. And I just thought some of the mindset of the Nuggets and how they were running their offense was bewildering to me. And I think that's where you had a coaching edge, which you never really suspect in a game like this, where it was. You had a young Adelman, who, yes, has pedigree with his dad and all that, but still, you got to make these choices. I thought the 2 turnovers were telling, and it made me turn the game off at halftime down 16. When they just tried to get the ball to the top of the key, and they were just little deflections. Guys was blocking the entry pass, and they went for 2 breakaway dunks, back-to-back possessions, trying to get the ball Jokic. Why wouldn't he get on the box? So, to me, I don't understand the strategy of basketball. I've watched it for years, gambled on it for years. The disappointment was I got fooled into Denver yesterday, believing they could be competitive and win the game just by what I saw. And the line kind of brought me down there. So now you got 10.5 game 1. They lose game 1 in a loss. They go up to 11.5 game 2, win by 40, right? Now they're a road favorite, right, that loses game 3, right? They come back and win game 4, don't cover. So they're 1-3 against the number in the first 4 games. They go to game 5, they're down 8 or 9 late in the game, cover by 7, which was remarkable. They got it to that number. And then they get beat up pretty good in game 6. So where did you see this happening in that little streak of games other than game 2? So they cover the last game. They go 2-5 against the spread, win the series. To me, the disappointing factor was, again, what is going on in the player's mindset to go lose a game 7 by 30 points? Like, where is it? Is Aaron Gordon that big of a deal? Did the odds makers say once he played, didn't push the line? When I didn't see that line get pushed to 9.5, 10, where it was originally without a healthy Gordon, it made me think maybe the odds makers know something, but I got fooled.
Yes, I know. We won't be fooled again, right from
Yes.
the line out of the Who and their fine songs. But so where do we stand with Minnesota and OKC?
I would not lay 355 in the series with OKC just because I think the matchup's tight. I think it still favors OKC to win. I'm going to watch game 1, maybe take a little bit on a 7.5 just to put a team in check who's just played off of game 7, right? So they have 1 day off. Minnesota's had a little rest. Sometimes that works against you. But I think the line might be a little bit high here at 7.5, but we'll take a chance. Maybe small wager Minnesota, maybe look at a live bet as I watch the first quarter, first half, maybe come in at halftime. Not in love with it. The other game, I'll give you something on the other series, though.
Yeah, okay. We have Indiana.
Yeah, I think this is a bad matchup for the Knicks.
Okay.
I look at all those guards they can run at Brunson. I look at the Siakam and Anunoby relationship. They've been teammates in the past. That's going to look like that's going to be a pairing. Turner and will give Towns a little bit of a problem. You're going to see a little bit more of Thomas Bryant, the ex-Heat guy, I think, when Robinson comes into the game. But they run a lot of guards on that court that are going to be tough. Hart's going to have his hands full. I like the 4.5 in game 1. The Knicks over all that emotion over the Celtics, City going crazy. And I'm going to take the dog in that series too. I got plus 140 with Indiana. I think the Pacers got to this. Eastern Final last year against Boston, and I think they get over the hump now.
Yeah,
I hate to do that against my old Knicks, but
had Halliburton not gotten hurt, that would have been a huge differential, you would say, in the Boston series.
right.
Knicks managed to hammer, and that was a surprise. Boston completely inept, came up dead lame, like you mentioned. They didn't have Tatum, but they had just won the previous game at the TD Garden by a wide margin. I don't know that anybody anticipated that level of blowout by the Knicks, but it was certainly impressive. And you would have to think that the executives of whoever ABC, I would imagine, has the rights to broadcast the finals, the NBA finals, they have to be dying.
Yeah.
Thinking that without the Knicks in there, this is not going to attract the kind of attention that would justify the massive fees they are charging their advertisers. Because this isn't the Super Bowl. You have Oklahoma City, as talented as they are, a sort of nondescript team as a national entity, and they go against the Indiana Pacers unless they brought Larry Bird out of retirement. I don't know that they're going to be the kind of attraction for an NBA Finals.
Yeah.
They may even resort to what they used to do in the past when the NBA was on the brink of extinction, where they have them on a tape-delayed basis, where they show you the finals at 2 o'clock in the morning because
Right.
not sure it's going to be the centerpiece.
Yeah, and Jeff, I think there's an important part of this to really go. And let's go back to the thing I've always been talking about is this PASPA ruling in 2018 to legalize sports betting.
Yeah.
You're a bettor, and you got Denver and you got the Celtics in those two games. You're a dog bettor, and you're watching your team just lay an egg. It really becomes more of an emotional thing that you're wasting your money. The winners don't gloat on the winnings enough to say this and that. The odds makers take the guys take your home team in these games and this. But now let's look at the non-bettor. Who is going to watch this product? Who is going to turn it on to see a first quarter where the team's down 20 and say, oh, they're going to blow it? Is that why we're sitting in there to watch a team's demise? Like, it's just not enjoyable for the non-betting fan. Now, the entity for me is interesting because I do a show and all that. I see it. But if I'm going to watch something now, it's the hockey, without question. That first period last night, a 0-0 game, had you thinking, here comes Toronto. They're coming back from the dead after Game 5 and then go in down in Florida and shut the mighty Panthers out. And then all of a sudden, Marchand, the veteran, gets it going. You start seeing these different shifts. And then Jones breaks the ice, and that seemed like at that point you could hear a pin drop, and the Toronto needed that first goal for their fan base in the arena, I think. And then once you got to 3-0, it was like where the jerseys are going to come flying out of the rafters again. It's like it becomes tough. You're in that atmosphere, and it's like all the Panthers needed to do was probably get that goal, and that seemed like to be the turning point. We were talking about it. So to me, he had a great first period, and the Panthers open it up, and then you get into that NBA-type feel for the third period when it's pretty much a blowout. But in hockey, you might get to see a fight, something a little bit off that you might not see in basketball. But to me, watching those Game 6 in Boston and Game 7, to see those 30-point losses and looks like teams are lethargic and banging threes, and the only way we can get back in is bang threes and lack of defense. I think the product fails a little bit to the average viewer, and I don't know if it wasn't for gambling where the NBA would be. I hate to say that because I'm a basketball junkie forever. But, man, is it tough to watch when you watch these results.
The argument is beginning to turn a little bit about hockey not being a desirable watch as a televised entity by comparison to the NBA because, as you said, I don't know that they're covering the games any differently, but it's been nothing but thrill in Manila type of stuff for the most part in the postseason. And even in this game where Toronto's dead flat, I actually thought I'm watching the second period, and it seemed to me like the Panthers were on a power play for the whole 20 minutes, the way that they dominated that period. They did get the 3 goals in a short stretch and then a questionable wave off of the fourth goal, which you thought, well, maybe they go to video review. And I don't know that should always be a challengeable thing from the coaching standpoint, where he's got a 3-0 lead. Paul Maurice, interesting decision because you would have normally said, hey, go ahead and challenge that. That looks pretty fishy that they waved this off. But being up 3-0, he has to decide whether discretion is the better part of valor and not wanting to lose that challenge, even though it appeared to be winnable, then offer up a chance for Toronto to get back in a game by going on a power play. That's a fairly suspect rule, in my opinion. I think a coach should be allowed a challenge without a penalty at least once during a game, considering how much reliance there is on instant replay and how marginal it is, the difference between whether or not a play was a clean play and offsides or a goal, the puck actually crossed the goal line in its entirety. All right, so they take on Carolina, and it was 2-1 Panthers in the season series against Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
And Carolina is one of those teams you don't see a lot of if you're watching. I mean, unless you have the hockey package, which I don't. Haven't seen
Mm-hmm.
a lot of Carolina until we got to the postseason. A real tough, hard nosed team. They're kind of knocking on the door. This is their
Mm-hmm.
second time in 3 years in the conference finals, once again against the Florida Panthers. What do you make of that series? Because if anything, I think the sharpest executive in all of sports right now would have to be credited, at least with his recent successes, is Bill Zito, the general
Yep.
manager of the Panthers, who you mentioned Jones, you mentioned Marchand. Those were the two key players. And
Mm-hmm.
where did they come from? They came from the trade deadline when
Right.
he sort of made two key additions at the edge of the trade deadline expiring, and both of them figured very prominently in this series
Yeah.
and most season so far.
Well. Here's what I look at is talking to my hockey guys who say that Carolina was their fear.
I love that you have hockey guys. That's my
Yeah.
favorite thing
Yeah.
about you.
You gotta talk to them. Carolina's the fear for the Panthers. This is the series that they think wins the cup. You know, a lot of people favor Dallas and Edmonton and all that, and I think that series is going to be electric, up and down series. This is going to be a more of a grind, physical, beat up series. I think. I look at this like Panthers are a quarter on the road, again favored in another series against a better regular season team that they're facing. Favored against Tampa, favored against, favored against Toronto, and now favored again. So the price makers then telling you that who's the best team. You know, here we go. Is it Florida? I think this is going 7, and I think it's going to come down to a much tighter game than we would see last night. I think it's going to be physical. I think it's going to come down to goaltending, so I'm going to give the edge to Bob in that end. But Anderson's been fantastic. And I'm worried a little bit about the defensive play of the Panthers last night, giving a tremendous amount of odd man rushes in that first period. They cleaned it up, which my buddy called me and said, they're going to clean this up. Don't worry. Don't get a jump on it. And, of course, he's waving his rat at me at the end of the game, telling me, I told you so. I told you so. But it's just one of these things. And I think it's going to be tight, but I'm going to stay with the Cats to get to the finals.
All right, the other series out in the West, Edmonton.
Other series is fantastic. I could just sit and watch McDavid for days on end. How great he is on his skate. But man, Dallas runs a lot of players at you. I think it's going to be a fabulous series. So I think Dallas. And then I see Edmonton's favored 120 on the road again. So we have the two road teams favored. Where else are you going to get better than this? But not much risk. I'm going to go a Dallas Florida Panther final.
All right, Dallas and Florida Panthers, and that would be in tune with what the odds makers were trying to dictate to you, because Dallas, I believe, was a slight favorite at plus 600 versus the Panthers plus 650 going into the Stanley Cup chase, and be very interesting for we call South Florida in terms of sports fans the town without pity. Nobody really cares. There's major indifference here, unless you're jumping on a bandwagon, which a lot of people have. So possibility though that a franchise that was just mired in less than mediocrity. The big joke used to be on my shows. At what point in November will they be mamathematically eliminated from postseason play in a league where almost nobody is eliminated? More than half the teams get into the postseason. Now they would distinguish themselves with 3 straight trips to the Stanley Cup final. So going to be pulling for them here in South Florida. But as you said, Carolina going to be a very formidable foe, and I don't know if it matches the level of excitement of this Toronto series and the Lightning series before that, even though that was a shorter series. I think, as you said, by comparison to the entertainment quotient that the NBA is offering, you have a whole different thing. All right, Major League Baseball. I know you're a big baseball guy. The Twins had their winning streak snapped. Were you on that? Did you use the?
Well, we stayed a little bit on that theory a little bit. You know, you kind of jump on the Twins. We took a little bit on the chin yesterday with them, but I knew the pitching matchup didn't favor them with Peralta. But you just got to ride that streak. That's kind of like it's a no-brainer. Don't handicap it. Just keep on the streak and just go. But that was one that I was in question. That was like the biggest dog they were. But I think the bigger story was not only did that streak go, but they got the Orioles manager fired, who had a great season last year. The Orioles were there. Is it the manager's fault that they let the players go? Burns leaves, Santander leaves, or is it how it happens? Yeah, they don't expect with their young guns to be a 300 win percentage, but it's just. That was interesting that the Nats get their first road sweep in a long time. And, we were on that yesterday thinking that the manager being fired, if he's well-liked, they were blown out on Saturday pretty much down 10, 7-0, 10-0, make it close. And then yesterday they got off to that start again. It's just, I don't know. You might want to bet against the Orioles, just keep it going until they find something. that might be a place to go. And I thought very fascinating. Now, I think this is the most important part of the weekend is how many bets do you got to make on the Dodgers to get back of a 3-game sweep where they're laying 2-1 in every game or more. I don't think I've ever seen that. Where does a 2-1 favorite in every game get swept at home? I mean, that was a real shocker to me. But I thought the one I got was, I think we got to watch this and give it out to the bettors here. Clayton Kershaw, velocity, was struggling to get to 90. And I think we're seeing the end of him, unfortunately. A great pitcher, not great in the postseason, but a phenomenal, regular season grind pitcher. But his first pop, he overthrew one, and it looked like it was like 100 compared to most of Vespa's. And you see it on the gun at 90 on the screen. And I'm like, 90? And then they gave up 3 in the first inning, and they were down at the end of 5. And so I was on the over a little bit with him there and thought the Angels at 190 was a decent play first time out. I think you watch that now and see where the price maker catches up and see where he's going at his next start. I think they're going to give it to him because they're in such – I don't think that Dodgers have to worry about playoff position, all that. And I think out of respect to what he's done, and I think the fan base, they're going to let Clayton Kershaw pitch a few starts. But I think he might be one of these guys that you might want to bet against coming up.
You hate to, as they said in Goodfellas, what Paul Sorbino says, now I got to turn my back on you after he gave Ray Liotta the 3,200 for a lifetime of loyalty. You hate to turn your back on a guy like Clayton Kershaw. I always was a fan of Kershaw. I liked what he did. I loved his accomplishments. Unfortunately, he was a brick in the postseason, and so that's going to be part of his legacy that gets tarnished a little bit, maybe a lot. And yet he's been hanging around and kind of reminds me of one of those guys that had an arm injury before Tommy John surgery proved to be so successful. And you had some flame-throwing left-hander like a Frank Tanana or one of your favorites probably from the past. Might be a little before your time, but being the old geezer at Caesars that I am, I remember Little Al Downing was one of my favorites as a Yankee pitcher, and the guy was a flame-throwing lefty. He hurt his arm, and he came back, and he became like Randy Jones, just throwing that left-handed slop, which in actuality is kind of ironic because these guys before Tommy John surgery actually became Tommy John. Because if you remember, Tommy John also was living on that left-handed slop that is so difficult to deal with and contend with if you're a hitter sometimes, if the guy can do it well. But, you hate to see this happen to Clayton Kershaw, and you would hate to think that he was just continuing his career past the point and sort of suffering a little bit of Muhammad Ali syndrome, where you're thinking, listen, Muhammad, you could hear, Freddie Pacheco in the corner going, hang it up already. And it may be time to go ahead and make that conclusion. But that was not an encouraging start, and I would have bet my lungs against Clayton Kershaw in that first start because it seemed very unlikely that he was going to be effective coming off.
And a shout out to Al Downing, by the way, who gave up Hank Aaron's
715th, right?
Home run, and also a shout out to my father, my late father, who got 2 for 3 off Al Downing in a Legion game, beat him 2-1 with a triple and a run scored. So there you go. Al's a legend in our family too.
Well, and he became a 20-game winner with the Dodgers. I remember.
He did. Great pitcher.
You thought he was finished, so it is possible, but I don't know if that's going to happen for Clayton Kershaw at this point. All right, a lot of interesting stuff. Mike Jones and of course the Preakness. Our man Umberto Rispoli goes through a small hole there. Our good friend Troy West, who was a feature on the program for a long time here on Bury Your Bookie. Sends me 2 tickets. He's got a $100 box, 2-9. So he cashes that. And I think the exact, with the favorite winning, became a little bit short. There were only 9 in the field, but it was like 30, something in the low 30s, I believe. So cashes for $1,600 on that. Came over the top. I always loved this. With the longer shot on top. I don't know where he came up with the 9. I never heard this horse Gosger's name mentioned one time in the build up to the race. Mm-hmm. You could have watched 100 hours of analysis, and I don't think anybody that I saw mentioned Gosger as a possibility. He was, I think, the longest shot in the field.
Yeah, 19 or 20-1, right?
Something in that neighborhood. And so he's got another $100 exacta straight, 9-2, which was Gosger over journalism. Now, at journalism, you didn't even know if he was going to get through that hole. That was remarkable because he got banged so hard, and then he sort of was really pinched off. I mean, they put a vice on this horse. Comes through there and was still trailing by like 6 lengths with 100 yards to go in a race.
Right.
And like Bullet Bob Hayes just shot out of a cannon. That horse has the most amazing late closing kick I've seen since a horse I used to love called Lita Justice. So it was competing, and I used to come from the clouds, but you could see that sort of momentum rolling all through the stretch. I don't even know before journalism got through that hole if he had come through cleanly, if he was even going to catch Gosger. So something to watch, and we're hoping that we get a little bit of Gotti Ward, a rematch here between Sovereignty
Yeah.
Journalism. I know Sovereignty will be in the Belmont Stakes at Saratoga
Mhm.
this year. Hopefully, Journalism came out of that race okay, and we'll be
Yeah.
bouncing back. So we shall see. But I don't know. Did you make any wagers on the
Yeah,
race?
just journalism a little bit. I was just not really. My wife and I actually forgot until the day of that it was really being played. We didn't see much lead up to it.
Yeah.
So we turned it on and caught a little bit of the pre-race. Everybody was on. Clever with the NBC group was all over the eight horse.
Clever again. Yeah.
Yeah, Clever again. So I was like, oh, what is that? And then I thought Sandman looked all right and ran a decent race, but took third. And but the fun part of this is if you go on some of these sites, you get the place. You don't have to place it in the race book. You place it on the bet, like you put up 50 and you get the winning price. So there's no real odds or place or show. And I saw a lot of advantages because the 21 was a long shot that they had like 4 or 5 horses that you could have gotten 50 or 60 to 1 on in the payoff. So
Wow.
I guess on the right side they knew it, but there's always something to check all the different ways you can bet these stake races when they put them out there, and some of the matchups that you get. They always have these one-on-one matchups that are pretty good to mess around with. So I always had a tendency to do that. I was looking and seeing. I didn't really take any of them, but I was kind of baffled by the fact that Pay Billy was like 15 to 1, but he was like $50 got you 12.50.
Wow.
Wait a minute, so that's like 30 to 1 almost, right? Like so. Yeah, so it was like kind of like looking at it like, wow, that's really interesting to see how they did that. But something to look at. I'll bring it up to you if I see it in the Belmont, because it's really interesting if you think there's a long shot possibility. If journalism, I think, was even money. So if you bet 250, you won 50, which is probably about the payout anyway, because he was even money. I think. What was the pay? I didn't even see the pay. What did you pay at?
I believe he went off even money. I ended up cashing on a pick 3 using the 2 races prior to that. One was won by a prohibitive favorite. So I was eating chalk, but I managed to turn it in. They always say don't get cute. At least that's one of my adages. If a horse appears to be unbeatable, go ahead and take advantage of it. Try to find a way. There are enough different vertical and horizontal exotic equations that you can put something together. And if you get lucky with a bomb or so in the middle, which in this case was a $12 horse in the middle, and the thing for $1 only paid 22. But I had it enough to actually make it worthwhile to drive back to the casino to cash my tickets. And of course, I left the money that I made right there. So I was going to hang out with a buddy of mine, have one drink, and I ended up pissing back all the money from the Preakness. But that's why gamblers die with their mouths wide open, because you're thinking about what kind of fool you were, and then the last thing that flashes before you is the amount of money you bet lifetime and lost. And they're going,
Yeah.
All right, Michael, you have a great week. The hockey and basketball players are going to be getting the shakes tonight. I hope you have enough to get through it, because the series in both sports resume on Tuesday with one game apiece Tuesday, one game apiece on Wednesday. So we'll look forward to that. Mike, always a pleasure, my friend. Have a great week. We'll talk to you again on Thursday, and thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
All right, Mike Jones, ladies and gentlemen, here on the Monday edition, the Peel Yourself Off the Mat edition of Bury Your Bookie.